book of Acts. And we'll take a biblical studies kind of perspective on it, but also our reason for not only taking the biblical studies perspective of the book of Acts is to deal with some of the issues we're facing of church renewal, starting new churches, multiplying leaders, what did the Spirit do and how did the Spirit do it, at least according to Luke, and what can we learn from it? What kind of principles can we gain that might be applicable in our context today? All right, we'll start in Acts 1:1. So in my former book, and what's the consensus of opinion as to what that former book was? Luke, okay, yeah, Luke. The Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, often referred to as Luke Acts, sort of part 1, part 2 of an ongoing story of Jesus, and then the continuation of the ministry of Jesus. And as we always note, the book of Acts has no end to it. No amen. It's the ongoing ministry of Jesus Christ that continues today. Who was this Luke? What can you tell me about Luke, if indeed that is the author? You notice his name isn't in the book.
He was a Gentile.
Okay.
That's believed.
Believed, yeah. Some think he was a Gentile, some think he was a Jew. I'd say the majority view is that he was a Gentile, but there is a minority scholarly view that he was a Jew. So one of the things we're going to do is notice some of Luke's code words, as I call them, when we go through, and I'll try to unpack his code words. And once you understand Luke's code, his writing becomes, I think, much clearer as to what he's trying to get at. Now, their code to us, I don't think, they were not code to his original readers. They got his message, I think, very clearly. It's just that we're a couple of thousand years later and have struggled with understanding some of Luke's terminology. Because Luke uses both Hellenistic writing styles, Hellenistic rhetoric, but he also uses Jewish midrash. This is why the debate goes back and forth. He's very good at using Jewish midrash, as a matter of fact. But this is a story. This is the verses 1 through 11 actually make a transition from the Gospel of Luke to a new stage in the story, and they both sort of hinge around, if you'll note, the temple and the ascension. It's sort of the pivot point of turning here. So I would just say the ascension in particular is the turning point of Luke Acts. And the prophet and the people. Luke's use of the Old Testament here is quite instructive. He obviously has done a very close reading of the book of Exodus. He's certainly familiar with Torah, not only Exodus, but Deuteronomy as well. He loves the book of Psalms. My goodness, he quotes from the Psalms a great deal. And he also loves the 12. You know who I mean by the 12? And I don't mean the apostles, I mean the Old Testament. Minor prophets, we call them, yeah. He loves the 12. In fact, when Luke says, and according to the prophets, or the prophets said, he usually means the 12 is who he's talking about. So that's one of his little key words. But the prophet and the people. Now in the Old Testament, the prophet, and this isn't something most people pick up on because I think the average churchgoer doesn't view this personage of the Old Testament as a prophet, and yet Luke clearly does, and I think the Jews certainly did. Who was in the Old Testament? Who was the prophet?
Elijah. Would you say
Yeah, that would be the common thought.
Elijah?
Nope. Yeah, that would be the common thought, but it's not the prophet. Moses. Moses was the prophet, and remember Moses' famous quote was, "And there shall arise a prophet like unto me,
Yeah.
who shall be greater than I,
Yeah.
him shall you hear." You think Luke's going to quote that at all? Yeah, I think Luke's going to make big use of that particular quote from the Old Testament, because he wants to identify Jesus as the prophet. Moses was the prophet. Jesus is the prophet for New remnant. I think remnant might be better than that starts in new, but restored, that's better.
Sure.
Restored Israel, the prophet. All right, the prophet, and who were the people that the prophet Moses had? Of course, Israel.
Yeah.
All right? The people of God.
Mhm.
Luke is going to, throughout his book of Acts, show Jesus is the prophet of the restored Israel. And the restored Israel is
Church.
the church, which potentially includes
Israel. And Gentiles.
the whole world, yeah,
Mhm.
everyone. This is the shocking truth of the covenant, is that the covenant originally was to include all people. Somehow the Jews gotten away from that, thinking that they were the one and only people. And what I'm thinking of, I might go back and say, what religion was Abraham when God called him?
Pagan.
He was a pagan. What ethnic group did he belong to? Was he Jew or Gentile? Well, if you define Jew as a descendant of Judah, yeah, and Gentile is everyone else, yeah. Abraham was a pagan Gentile. Isn't it interesting how the Jews, the popular Jewish religion, I don't mean the people as individuals, but I mean the popular Jewish religion of the first century, seems to have overlooked that? That the father of the faithful was a pagan Gentile when God made an unconditional covenant with him while he was yet in his sins. He said, in you, and you know the covenant what? In you shall all nations, ethne, all people, all nations of the earth be blessed. In your, what in particular? Seed. Anybody know the Greek word for seed? Bet you do. You may not know you know it, but I bet you do. Sperma.
Yeah.
Get it? Oh, men, here. In your sperma shall all nations of the earth be blessed. And it's sometimes it can be translated as descendants, but in particular, the sperma is singular.
See.
There's one seed.
Yeah.
And who is that seed, do you think?
Christ.
Christ, yes. Your seed shall all ethnic be blessed. Yeah. And Luke says that's the covenant. And takes it all the way forward to say it always included all people, right from the very beginning, all people. Mount Sinai merely made some new terms and arrangements as a part of the covenant, but then it was replaced with what we call the new covenant. The terms were simply changed from the works of the law, from obedience to Torah, to what were the new terms? Faith and grace were the new terms of the covenant. The covenant's not changed, but it always was, really, in actuality, a covenant of faith and a covenant by grace. Abram was chosen by grace, and he proved himself to be faithful. He believed. He just believed. And Luke is going to argue through his characters. Forgive me, I've talked this week. He's going to argue through his characters that this is the way now you become a child of Abraham is by faith.
Right.
Just like he became the chosen of God, you become his heirs, his descendants. Thus, the people of God by faith, not by Torah. Now, he's also going to have to argue because how can you explain that Jesus is the Messiah according to Torah? What does Torah say about everyone who's hanged on a tree?
The cursed of God.
Cursed of God. How can you have Jesus being the Messiah when he was hanged on a tree? You've got a huge problem with Torah. Okay, that should be enough of background, I think, to launch into it.